Hi, it's Roz, and I'm here to do a Tag for Tag Tuesday. In fact, I'm going to attempt to swiftly do two tags because tagging is kind of getting out of hand for me, and I feel the need to get two done. And strangely, these are both tags that were originated by Steve Donoghue, and he tagged me in one of them, and I've actually forgotten who tagged me in the other, which is dreadful. I should have checked that before I came on, but who cares? Whoever it is, thank you, and you'll know. So, tag number one that I'm going to do is the Cryptid Book Tag. This is a real Steve tag, isn't it? A cryptid is a mystery animal whose fans say it definitely could exist. So things like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and Yetis and that sort of sketch. So, prompt number one is, how do you deal with books recommended to you by their fervent true believers, like true believers in cryptids? Well, I used to be very polite. I am, at heart, a very polite person. And when someone enthused about a book to me, even if it sounded absolutely dreadful, I'd make suitably polite noises. And this was a terrible mistake, because then they would press a copy of that book on me because they knew I was a keen reader. And then I couldn't bring myself to be rude about the book, so I'd maybe say something sort of vaguely pleasant, and then the next book that came out by that author, they'd press the next one on me as well, and this could go on and on until I finally got brave enough to say, actually, I don't think the latest one was as good. I don't think I'm going to read anymore. I've got a little tougher in my old age, and now I ask interested questions about why they like something so much, but if it doesn't sound like something that I want to read, I'll just say so. Prompt number two. Cryptozoology is typically mocked as a pseudoscience. Well, it is a pseudoscience, isn't it? Pursued by charlatans and scientific illiterates, and yet it is oddly fun to investigate. I think that's Steve talking. Name a non-cryptology book that is fun, although deeply, deeply flawed. Oh, and I knew the one to go to for this, and that is Rogue Mail by Geoffrey Household. Now, just the name of that, you know, is going to be both fun and deeply, deeply flawed, don't you? Do you have a rogue male in your life? Are you the rogue male, I wonder? This book was written in 1939. It's terribly, terribly English, and a bit along the lines of something like 39 Steps or The Riddle in the Sands. I read it because the wonderful Robert Macfarlane, who's one of my favourite kind of nature and non-fiction writers, as you know, wrote about hollowways in Dorset, which are like old paths that have become so kind of been worn so deep into the ground, and the plants and shrubs and hedgerows and trees have grown over them that they've become like tunnels, and then they almost disappear. And the character in this book, he talks about this book because the character in this book goes to ground to escape his pursuers by living secretly in a hollow way in Dorset. It's tremendous fun in that sort of daring-do kind of way. Bit kind of blokey. It would probably be Jude Bro lit if it wasn't so terribly, terribly English. There we go. I would quite recommend it, actually. It's a good read. Prompt number three, Cryptid Water-Monsters. So we're talking like the Loch Ness Monster, that sort of thing. A favourite water-related book. Okay, well, for this, I had to pick The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, which was a huge book about 4 years ago, certainly in the UK at least, with the most gorgeous cover, because, you know, I'm shallow and sometimes a gorgeous cover does draw me in. And it's historical fiction, very much water related, because a whole chunk of it is set by the sort of salt marshes of Essex, a landscape that I really like, and it has a mystery beast in it that may or may not exist, that lives in the marshes and might kind of come out and snatch small children or something. bit along the lines of there's quite a few legends in the UK about that kind of beast, like the Lambton Worm was a famous one. Yeah, good fun. Not the best book ever, but a real page turner, and actually quite interesting on like Victorian women, like less predictable than some historical fiction, I guess. So, prompt number 4, Cryptid Dog-Monsters. A favourite book about a dog or a dog-like creature. Now, I don't read a lot of books about dogs, I have to say. It's not something that grabs me. I mean, not since I read, like, White Fang and Call of the Wild as a young person. But then I remembered Red Birds by Mohammed Hanif. Now, Hanif is, Pakistani writer, but I think he now lives in London. And Red Birds is an interesting book because it's kind of exploring kind of radicalisation and American bases, and you feel the context is vaguely kind of like the Gulf War or Syria or whatever. You don't exactly get Afghanistan, maybe it's sort of not too specific, but this book has 3 narrators, and one of those narrators is a dog called Mutt. Now, if I'd known that the book had a dog narrator, I might actually not have read it, because child narrators and animal narrators are really risky things, aren't they? But actually, I really enjoyed Red Birds, and yeah, it was a book with interesting things to say, and he just pulled off the dog narrator, I would say. Prompt number 5, Cryptid Biped-Monsters. Oh, it's real tongue twister stuff, this tag. A favourite book featuring a hominid who isn't Homo sapiens. So we're talking sort of Yeti and Bigfoot and so on, aren't we? Now, the book that I really wanted to choose for this prompt was this one, Stick of the Dump, yeah, by Clive King, which was one of my absolute favourite books as a child, because it's about a boy who becomes friends with a caveman that he finds in his local dump, who was called Stig. But I realised that I couldn't pick that because Stig is Homo sapiens. It may be a caveman, but he's definitely, well, possibly Neanderthal, but they're Homo sapiens, so I couldn't have that one. What a disappointment. So instead, I will pick The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. Very fine science fiction. I would say feminist science fiction, except I'm not sure she perhaps would have described it like that at the time, but with the delightful and fascinating ambisexual Gathenians as the hominids in that one. Prompt number 6, Cryptid Avian-Monsters, a favourite book featuring a bird. Okay, I couldn't do a tag, I think, without throwing in some poetry, and this is The Crow by Ted Hughes, which is a very wonderful collection of Ted Hughes poetry. I'm quite a Ted Hughes fan, and now he's dead, I guess we can stop being cross with him about Sylvia Plath, and just appreciate his poetry. And this book is, like most of the poems in it are kind of about the crow, in the voice of the crow. I particularly picked this, though, because of another book that I enjoyed even more recently, which is Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, which is in that strange overlapping territory between novel and poetry. It's kind of a novel, but it's kind of also a poem, and it is about grief, but that has a kind of an avian cryptid monster in it, which is the crow, who comes and kind of moves in and helps the children in this book and the father recover from their grief. And that crow in Grief is the Thing with Feathers is explicitly based on Ted Hughes' crow in his collection of poetry. yeah, it's quite upfront about that. So there we go. Prompt number 7, Cryptid Cat-Monsters. Oh, do you think by the end of this I might manage to say the word cryptid without stumbling over it? Okay, a favourite book featuring a cat, extra points if it is terrifyingly enormous. Well, my first thought for a favourite book, well, featuring a cat, or my favourite cat ever in a story, put it that way, is the cat Tobermory in a short story by Saki, or Hector Hugh Monroe's his proper name. And Tobermory is a cat that is taught to talk with devastating consequences. However, I wouldn't, in that case, get the bonus points for it being terrifyingly big. And also, it's just a short story, one of many, not a whole book. So I thought, I've got to think harder. I've got to rack my brains and come up with another. And then inspiration struck, and I remembered Man Tiger by Eka Kurniawan, Indonesian writer. Lovely novel, really enjoyed it. Starts with this kind of gruesome murder. That doesn't sound like a good start, and it turns out the key character in it is a young man who kind of carries within him a fairly literal white tigress, for reasons that become clear over the course of the book. So it's kind of like a why done it. And yeah, really, really interesting about sort of, I suppose, not exactly Indonesian folk culture, but kind of ways of thinking and explaining things. Yeah, I liked it. A goodie. It was written in 2004, but I think the translation came out in English in 2015, so fairly recent. Look out for it, I would say. And I would certainly read another book by Eka Kurniawan. So, that was the Cryptid Book Tag. Oh, then it ends with a whole set of questions to identify whether you yourself are a cryptid. And I've failed miserably to write those down. So, I might have to skip those. But they are entertaining, and maybe you should try them out on yourself. The conclusion I came to is that I possibly might be a cryptid, because people do find me peculiar and sometimes look at me aghast. But on the other hand, my family reliably inform me that I am entirely real. There you go. Well, now, that was tag number 1. Tag number 2, I've got to do even faster so I can get this all in under sort of 15 minutes or so. And that is the World Book Day tag. And this is the one which Steve started, but then I can't remember who it was that tagged me, and so apologies. But, and it's not even World Book Day anymore, but this is a tag just made for me. And in any case, Steve did it in April when it was American World Book Day, or maybe the whole world's World Book Day, but it's not English World Book Day. That's in March, so... Okay, what country do you currently call home, and is it the same one where you were born? It's the UK, and yes, it's the same one where I was born. Question number 2, how many countries have you visited? Well, I think 47, and if I'm a bit vague, that's because some of the countries that I visited when I was young are now more than one country, if that makes sense. So like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia that I visited, then I have to work out, okay, so which countries that are now countries in the former Yugoslavia did I actually visit while I was in Yugoslavia? You see the problem. Anyway, 46. I've also visited 153 countries in virtual visit through reading a book by someone from that place. So I've got 40-something countries, 42 countries to go to complete the set. Do I buy books when I'm there? No, actually, I don't tend to. Occasionally I do. I used to be so anxious about not having enough things to read when I took on holiday that I'd take such a big stack that I couldn't possibly buy another. And now I'd mostly take a Kindle. Sometimes, but rarely. Yeah. Prompt number 3, how well is the world represented in your personal book collection? Okay, well, I think you can guess that it's very well represented, because that's like, yeah, something I enjoy. Yeah. then more specifically, how many works in translation do you possess? And Steve specifies not counting canon, books that are in the canon. Now, I did sort of scratch my head a little working out what he meant by that. So I picked a kind of, I think he meant like, you're not going to pick like, I don't know, Plato or Euripides as books in translation, you know. So I arbitrarily picked the date 1900, and I'm only counting things that were published or written after 1900. Yeah. In which case I have 145 in paper copies and 102 as ebooks. There you go. There is a bit of overlap between those because sometimes I've got both a paper copy and a more recent edition in ebook or whatever. Prompt number 5 is tell us some weird facts about your country. Okay, well, I'm from England, and so really the choice is almost infinite to pick weird facts about England because, yeah, where do you start? So I thought actually that I would start with words and place names because that's something that I like. So weird thing number 1 is the number of places in England, well, and across the UK, that appear to be named after the devil. Basically, any time you get any sort of odd natural feature up and down the country, it'll be called the devil's this, that, or the other. The devil's frying pan, the devil's cauldron, the devil's punch bowl, the devil's horseback, the devil's, well, yeah, the devil, any number of devils. And the one nearest us, and they always have a story attached, and the one nearest me is the Devil's Dyke, which is about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from where I am. And the Devil's Dyke is like a natural, steep-sided, dry valley with no apparent river to cause it. Presumably it was caused by glaciation. Yeah, I should know that, shouldn't I? Anyway, the story is that the devil was trying to dig a dike. It's called Devil's Dyke because the devil was trying to dig a dike to cut Brighton off. No, kind of like connect a dike around Brighton so that it would kind of get washed out to sea or cut off from the rest of the country. Why the devil had it in for Brighton is not entirely clear. Fortunately, there was a wise old woman living in Brighton who saw what the devil was up to, and she found a colander, put a candle behind it, kicked her cockerel so that the cockerel would crow, and held the candle up behind the colander so that the light shone in it as if it was the rays of dawn. And by these 2 tricks, she convinced the devil that the sun was rising and he had to run away without completing his dike. But his last shovelful of earth that he threw into the sea turned into the Isle of Wight. There you go. That's one weird fact. Another weird fact about place names is that the UK has the only place in the world with 1 exclamation mark at the end of its name. That's Westward Ho, down in Devon. Very pretty place. But apparently there's somewhere in Quebec that has 2 exclamation marks in its name. How weird is that? But then, you know, with the Quebecois, what can I say? One more weird thing about place names in the UK is that we've had so many different successions of people here speaking different languages that have been kind of, you know, we've endlessly been invaded and had populations replaced. And so you get names where it's actually the same name in several successive different languages. For example, the nearest river to where I live is the River Ouse. The River Ouse where Virginia Woolf drowned herself, interestingly. And of course Ouse means river, so it is the River. There's a load of those. Humber's another. River Humber is river. Even better is Pendle Hill in Lancashire, because Pen was like a kind of Celtic name for a hill, and then it became Pendle, being an Old English name for a hill. So, and then they forgot that the ill bit of Pendle was actually hill, and so they then added the sort of modern English hill on the end. So you get hill. There you go. Weird things. Question number 6. is there a work of world literature on your TBR? Well, I'm going to go a bit pedantic here and say, what is world literature? I mean, all literature is world literature, isn't it? I presume I took this to be works of literature from anywhere other than your own country, because that's the rest of the world, isn't it, as far as I'm concerned. So, yes, of course, there's various on my TBR. In the piles of things next to my bed, I think there's about 6 books in translation, and I've got 2 in mind to read this month that I've got on my e-reader. The Illicit Happiness of Others by Manu Joseph, and Laurus by, I've forgotten his name, Russian writer, which I will put in the details below, which is one of my maybe midrash reads. And then finally, tag other booktubers, but none from your own country. Well, I have a feeling some of these people may already have been tagged, but I couldn't quite successfully check. So I'm going to tag Jay Shea, who is from Canada, I believe, Scott and Nell, who are from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, great name that, isn't it, who are Australian, Madeline of Made with Books, who's German, I think, Jason of Old Blues Chapter and Verse, because he's from one side of the United States, and Heidi of My Reading Life, because she's from all the way on the other side in Maine. And apologies if you've already done this and I haven't managed to twig that, or you've already been tagged by someone else. Brilliant! Happy Tuesday, everybody!